Welcome back to BizMafia, where business gets made. I'm your co-host, Brian Taylor, joined by my partner, Pat Linden. Pat, how are you?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing real well, bud. Well, before we dive into our interview with Mark, I'd like to remind the audience to connect with us if they haven't already on Spotify, Apple, or wherever podcasts are available. Your feedback is invaluable to us as we continuously work tirelessly, that is, to bring you top-notch episodes. So, Pat, we have a guest that you have a unique relationship with. And so with that, why don't I let you do the introductions here?
Yeah, for sure. So my relationship with Mark goes back probably 6 or 7 years. Of all things, we met at a nondescript studio gym. I recognized him. There's a picture of him on the wall, big old red hair, doing like a Heisman pose. And I knew him from watching him on TV as a sportscaster back when I was in high school and college and everything else. So we've gotten to know one another. He's become a good friend. He exemplifies the human spirit more than pretty much anybody I've ever met. Now, we're going to get into the reasons why, but the quick down low before I let you take it away, Mark. 20-year sportscaster. Most people who've been around Denver long enough know you. As close to the CU program back in the heydays as anybody. Even doing a kind of a column now routinely on the Deion Sanders CU phenomenon. Amazing stories. Pete Rose, Miracle at Michigan, Jerry Rice, we'll touch on some of those things. Also a tremendous passion for education, eradicating homelessness, lessening its impact. And he is a leader who's done numerous ventures, started numerous ventures, because that's what he believes in and is a champion of life. And then lastly, Mark was diagnosed with amyloidosis about a year ago, which is an incurable disease. It's very serious, but like the true champ he is, he's taken on advocacy, become an organ donor, and it's incredible. So Mark, you are a stud. You are the man. Thanks for joining us. Let's get into it.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Mark.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks, guys. And, Lyndon, where were you when I was still full-time in the TV business and I needed an agent?
Well, hey, there you go. I did do a little NFL stuff. Maybe you can pick up an MC career or something at this point.
You never know. You never know. But it's just a real pleasure to be with you guys. And it's been a crazy journey, really. I don't know exactly where you want me to start.
Well, but I'll jump in here because as Pat has, made me aware of some of the stories maybe you can't publicly see. The first thing that came to mind as you were finding your way early in your career, and that's where we'll start, is that life is an exploration and you need to embrace its unfolding journey. And you've done that. Yeah. So, if we could, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah. So I grew up in the suburb, Raytown, Missouri, a suburb of Kansas City. If anybody watching, listening has driven through Kansas City or knows Kansas City, where Arrowhead Stadium and Kauffman Stadium, I grew up just south of there. We're kind of where Raytown, Independence, and Kansas City all come together at I-435 and I-70. And I was just a dumb old jock, and I just gravitated towards sports at a very early age. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was a 3-sport high school All-American. I was a quarterback playing football. I was an athlete playing quarterback, basically. Point guard in basketball, center fielder in baseball. February of 1976, I signed a letter of intent to play football and baseball at the University of Missouri. And then in June of 1976, I was projected to be a first-round, second-round choice in the amateur baseball draft. I was a center fielder. I could, what they call a 5-tool player. I could run, I could throw, I could field, I could hit, and I could hit with power. So baseball was really my ticket. I'm 5'10". Back then I was 180 pounds, but down about 142 with the amyloidosis, but we'll get to that.
You're looking good though, man. Still getting after it in the weight room too.
Yeah. But so it's February of 1976. I'm without question the most celebrated high school athlete in the Kansas City area. Life was good. And I'm running down the floor in a high school basketball game, and I accidentally got poked in the eye. And it kind of touched a nerve, and it led to a rapid drop in blood pressure. And so I was kind of staggering across the court, just a few feet from our bench. I fainted and went down on my whole upper left side. I don't remember anything after that. From what I've been told, I was laying there in a pool of blood. Blood's pouring out of my left ear. I was in seizure. They had to stop the game, throw me in the back of an ambulance, rush me off to the hospital to save my life. I had fractured my skull, suffered a severe concussion, broke all the bones in my middle ear, your cochlear bones. They control your equilibrium and depth perception. So I couldn't judge fly balls anymore. When I went down, I tore up all the rotator cuff muscles in my left shoulder. I'm left-handed. I couldn't throw anymore, and I'm deaf in my left ear from bam, hitting the floor. So my athletic career was over from a freak poke in the eye. I went off to Mizzou. They honored my scholarship. I'm very grateful for that, but I couldn't play. I couldn't play football because of the severity of my head injuries, and I couldn't play baseball because two important things: catch the ball and throw the ball. I was no longer able to do at the level that, is required. So I kind of made a conscious decision, guys, being the competitor I am, and I know the competitors you guys are, and, I said, by golly, if I can't be the best athlete, I'm going to be the best partier. And I gave it the good old college try. But I was lost. I was 17 years old, and all my goals and aspirations, my goal was to be in the big leagues by the time I was 22, 3,000 hits by the time I'm 40, Hall of Fame by the time I'm 45. That was my plan.
Yeah.
But God obviously had a different plan. But I was at Mizzou and made some wonderful friendships. And a lot of those guys are now a big part of Drive for Five that I know we're going to talk about later. But I was lost. I was doing way too much drinking, drugging, womanizing. I was lost. I had lost my identity. I was a jock, and suddenly I wasn't a jock. And I got out of school, and I'm a pretty personable guy. And people say, "Oh yeah, go into sales. Go into sales. You'd be a good salesperson." So, I went into sales for a while, but my heart wasn't in it. And I bumped around. I worked for Frito-Lay down in Dallas, and then I moved to Denver and took a terrible job. But I helped a friend move up here in August, and I was working in Frito-Lay in a 10 box. I was on the sales management program for Frito-Lay. So, August heat in Texas, inside a 10 box, working 10 hours a day. And I helped a friend move up to Denver, and it was like 75 degrees. And we went up to the mountains, and, I had to wear a sweater at night and all that kind of stuff. So I took a job sight unseen in Denver. It was a terrible job. I started watching Channel 4, and I became a big fan of Ron Zappolo. And I just had an epiphany. One day he was doing a live shot in the Broncos locker room, John Elway's rookie year. He had just rallied the Broncos to beat the Baltimore Colts, the team that had drafted him. And he had said, "The heck with you, I'm not going to play for you." And I'm sitting there watching Ron do a live shot in the Broncos locker room. He's talking about, John Elway leads the Broncos back and everything. I just had an epiphany. I want to be a sportscaster like Ron Zappolo. So I went back to the University of Missouri, got my master's in journalism. I was also the house father at the fraternity I was in as an undergrad. They had to call me Mr. Mom. They had to stand up when I'd walk down for dinner. They all had to stand up. I'd go, sit down. But so I got my master's in journalism, and I began my sportscasting career down in the Rio Grande Valley. KGBT, Cahabite, the CBS station in the Rio Grande Valley. And then I came to Denver in 88, and there's been all kinds of stuff happened since then. But that's how I got to Denver for a second time.
That's great.
So what's the business of being a sportscaster really like day to day? Give us an idea
Well,
of that.
it's, and I taught radio and television news writing as an adjunct professor at CU for 4 years. And so I'd always have all these young college kids. And, I traveled the world. Back then, General Electric owned NBC. Channel 4 was NBC, and then Fox got into football and things got crazy, and we switched over to CBS. But General Electric was flying high back then, and we traveled first class. We went wherever anything was going on, Colorado sports-wise, we were there. And, so it's a wonderful, I'm just an old jock, and I got paid to, hey, everybody, here we are, and here's what's going on. So it was great. But the one thing, it's very difficult on family life because you travel all the time, you work weekends, you work nights, So it's a tough job, when Dan Reeves quits or Bill McCartney quits or something like that. If you've got dinner plans, sorry, get your ass to the station and get on this story. So while it's a wonderful profession, it's not your average job that you can plan. You are basically, you're like a doctor, you're like an ER doc, you're on call 24/7. So there's some drawbacks. And, you start out in the rookie leagues. My first job as the weekend sportscaster at KGBT, I was making $12,500 a year. Now, this is 1985. Remember that show, Trapper John, MD? Remember Gonzo, his sidekick that lived in the trailer out in the parking lot?
Yeah, it's like how my relationship with Brian, he's Gonzo.
Well, I was
Keep my
Gonzo.
response clean, Pat.
I'm making $12,500 a year. So I lived in a trailer and I didn't have a phone, but there was a payphone right outside my trailer. And anybody that needed to get in touch with me, they would call that payphone and I'd go out there and answer it. This before cell phones or anything.
So this brings me to something that's awesome. Kind of humble roots and worked your way, obviously. But you said something that you and I have talked about a little bit, that Dan Reeves thing. And this is a business show, and some of the things that we like so much that made you such a great guest were ability to overcome adversity, and then understanding the parallels of sports and business. I mean, they're very related in their own way. But you told me a Dan Reeves story. I want you to tell it for the audience. Sure. And one of the points behind that was the ability to be nice and get along with people. You are one of the nicest guys around, but that made a big difference for you because a lot of sports figures in the sports business, they don't like the media. And tell us about Dan Reeves in particular. I know you had had a good relationship with him.
Yeah. And I think before I launch into the story, I think one of the things, because I was a former athlete, that because of injury, I think I came at my job as a sportscaster a little different than, say, guys that were sports fans, but had never, paid the price or, you know what I'm saying? That, I competed at a pretty high level before injuries ended my career. So I think I had a different connection with the athletes and coaches that I interviewed and interacted with because I was kind of coming at it from their angle, But Dan Reeves, so back in the day, Channel 4 was the home of the Broncos. It was also home of the Buffs. We were the home of just about everything back then. But so I flew on the CU team plane. So whenever the Buffs would go off to wherever to play, everybody Denver-based, like the KOA guys and the KCNC and Denver Post people, the Denver-based traveling party, we'd meet at a hotel out at Stapleton, because this is back when Stapleton was the airport. And so I got to know the bellhops at the hotel, the Renaissance. It's got that glass elevator and all that kind of stuff. And so you're sitting around waiting to get on a bus that takes you out on the tarmac, and we get on the plane, and then here come the Buffs down from Boulder. They get on the plane, and off we go to Norman, Oklahoma, or Lincoln, Nebraska, or Ann Arbor, Michigan, or wherever. So I got to know the bellhops there because you spend a lot of time just sitting around. And so I had given them my card and let them know that, hey, if you ever see anything around here, let me know. So one day I'm just sitting in the Channel 4 sports office, and my phone rings. I pick it up, and it's, hey, Mark, it's Bob Bellhop over at the Renaissance. Oh, hey, Bob, how are you, man? Hey, this was right after Dan Reeves had been fired, but he had made it known that he still wants to coach. And so there was all kinds of speculation. Where's Dan going to go? Where's Dan going to go? And, so everybody was trying to get the scoop. So Bob says, Mark, there's a bunch of guys from New York here for a sales convention, and they tell me they could have swore that George Young, who at the time was the general manager of the New York Giants, just went up in the elevator with Dan Reeves. Oh, okay. So I get a photog. We go out and we sit at the Renaissance, and we sat there for about 3 hours just in the lobby, just right in front of those elevators, just waiting. And then sure enough, after about 3 hours, elevators coming down, and there's Dan Reeves and George Young. and Dan and I kind of locked eyes, and so we went around the corner, elevator doors opened up, and didn't even have a chance to say hi or anything. He just said, "How in the hell did you know I was here?" And I said, "Well, that's my job to know that." And so one of the things about the news business, when you break a story, you own the story. And so, like they drug out for like 10 days a week, I don't know, or 2 weeks, I don't know how long it was. But it got to the point where I was sitting outside of his house sometimes, because state said, "You got to be the first to confirm all this, blah, blah, blah." And one day, he actually came out because he knew I was sitting out there, and we kind of talked. And I said, "Coach, I'm sorry. They're station." And he goes, "No problem, no problem." So I broke that story. I was all over that story. It was a real feather in the cap, all that kind of stuff. But now he's headed off to New York. So I wrote him a handwritten note just saying, "Coach, thanks for being so patient with me," and all that kind of stuff. And he wrote me back. And it was the most heartfelt note from him, just saying, "Mark, you were just doing your job, and best of luck in your career," and all that kind of stuff. And, Dan Reeves was a wonderful, wonderful man. And, it just, to Pat's point, that if, the way you treat one another just really, really can pay off, and so, and that's true in business, and that's true in life, right? What goes around comes around kind of stuff. And I got another great story about that, but maybe we don't have time for it.
No, this is good. I think you touched on something too, right? Is like in this day and age, it's less of a personal touch, right? With all the technology that's being deployed, is still being a good person and doing your job with class. It still pays off, and you've shown that.
Well, you had a bellhop. You were nice to the bellhop.
Yeah.
And if you hadn't been treated that guy as the same way you treat everybody else, he never would have reached out to you, and therefore never would have had the opportunity.
Which then turned into your relationship with Dan Reeves, which then probably turned into other relationships, right? And so,
and I'm very blessed. A lot of those guys that I covered, so to speak, they've become friends and acquaintances.
I want to ask a question that I think is really, you would have as much insight as anybody, and it's as relatable to business as anything else. On that front, the CU Buffs are back in the headlines because of Deion Sanders. But those of us, those of us that have been around, we know that the late 80s and 90s, I mean, even beyond, CU was a powerhouse, and you were as close to the program as anybody.
Yeah.
What people don't know is you're also as close to this day to Bill McCartney, suffering from Alzheimer's as really anybody. You go see him almost every weekend. Take us through, Mark. We know that they got inner city kids. We know he was a great recruiter. That's kind of the extent of at least what I understand, but take us into what he built the program into, and good business practices and relatableness to kids. You were there. What was that like?
And, how does a white coach was able to go into inner city LA, inner city Houston, inner city New Orleans, and recruit the great black athlete? And it gets back to relationships. And, in business, it's all about relationships, right? And Coach Mack, he'd always talk about, he knew he was going into homes where a lot of these kids, father was not around, and that mom was the driving influence. And so when Mack would go into these homes, the first thing he would do is, when the head coach is coming, the aunts and the uncles and the cousins, everybody wants to be there, right? They want to meet the coach. And so Mack he'd walk into the home, and he'd kind of size up the room, and he'd meet everybody. But then he'd go into the kitchen, and he'd get a chair, and he'd come back out, and he'd put the chair right in front of mom and start talking directly to mom. And he can be persuasive, and by the time he walked out, so many of those women, moms, would go, "I want my son to play for that guy, because my son needs a good role model in his life." And Coach Mack also was very smart that, at least 50% of his assistant coaches were black as well. so that, and think about it, you're recruiting the great black athletes from LA, Houston, New Orleans, Detroit, Michael Westbrook, et cetera. And they're coming to Lily White Boulder, where they're like, where are my brothers and sisters, But McCartney had that magnetism, and it started with Coach Mack has always had a real tender heart for the underdog. And, he would see these kids that, are great athletes, but maybe hadn't had a whole lot of direction. Mac just had a tender heart for really the black man, for these black kids. And because so many, the problem's gotten even worse today, really. And that's the thing that now take it to today with Coach Prime. And I'm blessed, you mentioned this earlier, but I write for Sports Illustrated. I write a weekly column about Colorado athletics. But my first column was about the similarities between Bill McCartney and Deion Coach Prime Sanders. All right. One's a flashy Hall of Fame black dude. The other's, a dude that grew up in Detroit, learned from Bo Schembechler. What are the similarities? But to me, they had three. They both are very good recruiters. They can recruit. They are both men of deep faith. And the third thing is they're more concerned, or just as concerned, with developing young men as they are winning football game. And so in many ways, McCartney and Sanders, very, very similar.
Yeah. Mark, what are some of the other things? If you look at Nick Saban as an example, I didn't always like Nick Saban. I don't think a lot of people did, but as he got to the end of his career, I just thought it was remarkable what he'd done, and we did it the right way as well. Mm-hmm. I think a guy like him, and probably a Mike Shanahan, so many great coaches that run programs, I've got to imagine would probably be great CEOs, because they not only understand the fundamentals of athletics, coaching, or in the business sense, great CEO understands the business, but there's a sales element, there's a management element. Do you share that opinion? Those kind of guys would be great business people?
Without question, especially these days, when you look at how large football staffs have become, and like a lot of coaches for a while were coach and athletic director. These athletic departments just get bigger and bigger and bigger. They are corporation. And the one thing that, like McCartney, and I think Saban, same thing, you're like the CEO, and you've got to surround yourself. McCartney realized real early that X's and O's weren't necessarily his strong suit, that, recruiting and exhorting and inspiring the troops and all that was his strong point. So he made it a point with the assistants he hired. They were real solid X's and O's guys. And I think that's the same thing for a CEO, right? You're kind of setting the tone for the corporation, but you need a sharp marketing person. You need a sharp HR person, whatever, call them defensive coordinators, offensive coordinators, special teams, recruiting coordinator. It's the same thing.
It's a team.
Yeah, it's a team. It's a team. And, I think most of the successful business owners that I've been blessed to hang around with, they treat it that way. We're a team. We're team members, and it's always good to have a good COO, because you're so busy kind of being the PR person and everything and setting the tone that you need somebody right there by you that makes sure all the I's are getting dotted and the T's are getting crossed.
So with that, you've worked with other business leaders. You've been around coaches and athletes. What are the common characteristics or traits that they have that make them successful, right? Or separate them from, the common individual?
I would say the first thing that pops to mind is their ability to problem solve. We can sit here and brainstorm all we want and have the greatest marketing campaign, whatever. And then COVID hits or something. There's always going to be unexpected twists and turns on the journey. And, I think the true leaders, they don't get rattled. They go, okay, all right, this is not going the way we plan. I didn't plan on having amyloidosis and kidney disease and needing a kidney transplant and all that kind of stuff. But it's, what are you going to do about it? Same, So I think that's the first thing is you've got to have a leader. I look for when the crap's hitting the fan, how do they react? Do they stay calm? Do they, it's almost like athletes, some athletes, the more pressure, the better they play.
Yeah.
Elway, Montana, current CJ Stroud. And then you look at like Dak Prescott. The bigger the game, seems like the worse he plays. So I think great leaders have to be able to change on the fly. And I was very lucky in that I grew up, I was a point guard, I was a quarterback. I was always having to problem solve. Just innately, that's your job. The other team is trying to prevent you from scoring, So you gotta. So I think that's the first thing: calmness under fire, ability to problem solve. And then I think you also, far more with our actions and our words, you got to set the tone. People have to feel valued. Having an understanding that it's what a blessing it is that I'm kind of like the quarterback, the captain of this thing. But without the 10 other people, I knew I played before behind good offensive lines and bad offensive lines. Man, if you don't,
hey, listen, as an ex-running back, if you in my day, back in my glory day, as they say, you don't have a good offensive line. I don't care who you are. You better be Barry Sanders, but short of that, you aren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
So
I think that's fascinating because these are important, right? And I think, there are some that view those who have some sort of athletic background, right? Men or women's sports that make them really good at said job in the business world because they've had to compete, right? They've had to sweat. They've had to work hard towards something. And so those things generally translate well into business. And I know some executives myself who will hire based on, look, I like that they have some form of an athletic background. I'm curious because you have all these great interactions. You start at some point to build your own brand, right? Were you inspired? And at what point did you decide that you were going to become a business yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, that was basically, it was after my second divorce. And I'm on my third marriage. I'm a good 2-strike hitter. I went through 2 painful divorces. I have a child from each marriage. Both ladies decided to take their lives in a different direction, but it opened the door for my amazing wife to come in. So, and my kids are healthy and all that kind of jazz. But I was going to a divorce recovery class, and I kind of shared, my story of, what you guys have already heard, pretty good athlete, and that goes away. And then I kind of got my act together and got into the sportscasting business. And now, I'm sitting here, second divorce, and trying to figure out what's the old saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. What was I bringing to the table? It was contributing to, and both my formers went on to marry very wealthy guys. So I'm a good warm-up act. But anyway, the person who was facilitating this divorce recovery, she said, you need to start sharing your story of, keeping a good attitude and everything. And part of this is my faith too. My faith has grown, in the last 40 years. So my faith was also a big part of me being able to kind of handle adversity. But anyway, so I started Victory Production, and I started speaking and writing, and I've written 4 books, and I blog. I write 3 columns a week now, so I'm busy, and I speak a lot to groups about overcoming adversity, which kind of led to me working with displaced men and low income kids and people looking for live organ donors. But so without question, my sports background played a huge role in the development of Victory Productions and the consulting work we do today around displaced men, low-income kids, and live organ donation. But it's all from my athletic background and hanging around business people. But I'm not a business guy, so to speak. I'm a CEO kind of executive director kind of guy. That I create the content and I go out and I try to encourage people to buy what we're selling.
Well, you are the business. Yeah.
I think, Mark, one of the cool things about your story, and again, going back to that athletic background that you shared, 3-sport All-American, prime of your life, and then overcoming that. I know it affected you for a long time. It affects all of us who are athletes, and we didn't go as far as we thought, and most of us weren't All-Americans and all that. But you then kind of take that overcoming piece that we all know, and that makes us all tougher, and from being athletes, right? You take that into your life and you move on from the kind of the inner workings of the sports world, right? And you took that and then developed this whole different brand, like Brian said. And I mean, just one, I'll get to the question, but you were able to do that successfully. And one of the things that you've shared with me personally, I know homelessness is a big deal, and helping men deal with that. We're all probably in some way, shape, or form not that far from it, right? An addiction or whatever the case is. And you, Mark, what everybody may not know is Mark has started these programs, and you go in and you speak to these guys like you were Bill McCartney, and you talk about discipline and accountability to men that haven't had that sort of influence. And you and I have talked openly. Some of these guys buy in, and some won't. Take us through that. How do you change a guy's life that way?
And that all got started because back after I got hurt, I went to Mizzou. I couldn't play, and I was lost, right? And I couldn't go to the football games. I did, but I was like, I'm supposed to be out there. I'm not supposed to be up here in the stands, seeing how many Harpo cups of beer I can drink during the game and all that kind of stuff. I felt like a fish out of water in some ways. And by the time I was a senior, I was doing way too much drinking and, recreational drugging and womanizing. The girls of Columbia, Mizzou, they go, oh God, here he comes. Look out, man. He is trouble. There were so many nights that I drove home from the bars of Columbia, Missouri, just blasted out of my mind. I never got a DUI. I never hit anything and hurt myself. And thank God I never hit somebody. My story could have easily been once promising athlete convicted of vehicular manslaughter. But only God's grace, I got through that. And so I've always had a real tender heart, back to McCartney talking about, I've had a real tender heart for the downtrodden guy because I know that could have been me. And so I started about 10 years ago. I just felt called to go down to the Denver Rescue Mission and, do something, because we got 10 years ago, we had way too many. And today we got way too many guys on the streets. So I just went in and said, what can I do to help? And they said, well, we need somebody to run the Thursday morning devotion. All right. So I started leading the Thursday morning devotion for guys in the New Life program. These are guys that are in a program. They're trying to get their act together. And that was the birth of A Stronger Cord. And so and we just we got another guy off the streets last week. And so me and other Stronger Cord volunteers, and I'm looking for men to be comeback coaches. Anybody out there interested? We go build relationships with these guys. We earn their trust, and then we encourage them to take advantage of the resources available to them. But the first thing we got to do is build a relationship and earn their trust, because they have so much trauma, they have so much distrust. And when you hear their stories, you go, holy smokes, nobody's ever taught them how to live successfully. And that's what we're trying to do.
So Mark, even though I knew and all of this before this, it's kind of clear to me now why you're the comeback coach. You're really a coach. Yeah, you spend your time with a lot of athletes and coaches, and you're a coach and you're doing it very effectively. So it's really cool to kind of see that. I could actually see, if you had gone in a different path, you being the kind of guy who is running a major program or something.
When I was living in Denver, when I saw Ron and I had the epiphany, I was having this internal, and here's another business thing for people. There's probably people out there that go, do I really want to do this the rest of my life? Or which path should I take? I was going back and forth between, should I be a sportscaster or should I be a coach? I could probably make more money as a sportscaster than as a coach. So I took the sportscasting route. But, some of these coaches are making $11 million a year these days, as are some sportscasters. So either way would have been fine. I identify, when somebody calls me a coach, I feel comfortable with that. When somebody says inspirational speaker or this or that, but he's a coach. That's what I feel like I am.
Yeah. And along those lines, right? And again, I think this is another crossover to business and to sports. And to being the coach that you are is you personally have had to face some fears, right? And then there are moments you've shared with us and are yet to share with the audience that there are moments you faced during your journey where fear threatened to overpower your optimism. I'm curious, how did you overcome those challenges? What did you learn? And then how did you apply it to the way you're helping others?
Yeah. Well, I think everything kind of goes back to sports, right? I mean, I just was very blessed growing up to have great coaches. And, they acknowledged our fears. We prepared, we went out there, and most of the time we were pretty successful. But one of my favorite sayings, and I talked to, these guys that were trying to help, displaced men build a stronger cord to their families' purpose and communities, or these low-income kids that were trying to say, hey, you can go to college, or to encourage people, hey, you can share your spare, save a life, leave a priceless legacy, is don't let fear get in the way of your dreams. Instead, remember, courage is the soul of your dreams. You got courage and fear, courage and fear. Which one are you, what's that saying? Which bear are you going to feed, or which lion, or remember that, which wolf are you going to feed? I mean,
so good. Yeah,
when
so
I'm
true.
in the gym and this knucklehead's throwing around ungodly amount
Those
of
10-pound weights.
I go, because sometimes I'll go, how much weight? He'll go, it's nothing. Like, well, to some of us, it's significant.
No, it's just that I was inspired by Tommy Boy when that one scene where he's kind of by the pool and the woman walks by and he goes, you know which way the weight room is? I'll check it out. I keep wanting to pull that line. So I figure, no, I'm kidding. But
the fear of putting 10 more pounds on, and can I do 10 reps? So, I mean, I think anybody that says they don't have to battle fear, I think is lying.
Mark,
but you have to overcome it.
For sure. I want to make sure we have ample time to get into what you're battling now and how you're overcoming that remarkably. Before we do, there are two things that you have to share because I think they're on point. You and I have had conversations about shifting a little bit away for the moment from the coaching thing, which is in business and sports is, again, great parallel. You have the people who become the best, right? Take the Michael Jordans. And there's only one Jordan out of billions, and there's only one of John Elway out of
He
everybody.
got cut from his ninth grade basketball
Exactly.
team.
But you have a story about Jerry Rice that I think typifies greatness with talent and work ethic. Tell us your personal story there.
So this is back in the late 90s. The Broncos are world champions. The Avs are world champs. CU was good. Rick Neuheisel was the coach. So there was a lot of Colorado-based sports celebrities that went out and played in that celebrity golf tournament out in Lake Tahoe. So one of the more difficult assignments of my career, I was tasked to go to Lake Tahoe for a week and hang out with these knuckleheads. They're all playing golf, right? It's not like they're playing in the Super Bowl and they're all out there playing golf, having a good time. So I'm out there and I'm looking.
What a bummer.
Yeah. I mean, it was, but again, you're away from your family. You got young kids and they're, Dad, when are you coming home? So it was just one of the nights, and I had written a story for like the 6 o'clock news or something. And I'm just sitting out looking out over Lake Tahoe. Actually, I was getting ready for the 10 o'clock live shot because the sun was going down. So I'm just sitting out there. All these athletes are inside partying up, having a good time. I'm just watching the sunset over the Sierras. We've got Lake Tahoe. It's a beautiful setting. And then it's kind of like dusk. And then I kind of look over. I got all this noise inside. All these guys are partying, having a good time. And I look down at the practice range. There's one dude down there just hitting golf ball after golf ball after golf ball. All of his buddies are inside her. And so I was curious. So I just waltzed down there and I got closer. It was Jerry Rice. And I said, wow, man, all your buddies are inside and you're out here. Why? And he said, I just started to play this game and I don't know anything else but hard work to be the best. And so I ended up doing a story on that, I think, for the next day. But here's the greatest wide receiver in the history of the National Football League. And, he wasn't the biggest. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the strongest. He was all of those. But he wasn't, but nobody outworked Jerry Rice. Nobody. And now he's like a 2 handicap. But I think, guys, in this, again, this is true in business, life, sports, whatever. I think for most of us, that's inside of us, but that's where you need a good coach to bring it out and to nurture it and to water it. And Jerry Rice had a lot of great people around him. He'd be the first one to say that. That's what Coach Prime really impresses me.
I think in sports, we were all athletes. Brian was a football player at Southern Illinois. I played at Dartmouth and the University of Denver. You played. Having that coach that believes in you is everything. It really is. And I think conversely, in business, it's the same thing. I mean, I know there was one lawyer, best lawyer I ever worked with. His name was John Moy, kind of a legend here. The guy I'd do anything for him. He made me feel like, I was better than I was. And then you had other people where you lose your confidence, you lose your ability, and you can't operate under them. I think that's a really powerful point.
It's the same. Some players don't thrive under certain coaches. So I think as a business person, I would look at it like a coach. I'm trying to nurture this talent beneath me, because if I nurture that talent, but a lot of people fearful that if I nurture the talent, it's going to take my job.
And so conversely, too, if you have the wrong coach and they don't perform well under pressure, then they're not bringing up the next, generation or batch of talent, right? They're more fearful than anything, and they're letting that fear consume them versus, some of the coaches you named earlier, they had confidence. They have confidence.
Yeah.
And that carries them through the lows and the highs, right? That's been consistent.
And so I don't know why you'd look at it any differently in business. That's my wife, if I can just real quick, my wife, very successful businesswoman. And so I'd have the pleasure of traveling the world with her, just, her plus one. And people that work for her come on and go, "Oh, Mark, I just love working for Kathy." I go, nobody likes working for her more than I do, That she nurtured talent. I think that,
great example.
Leaders, you nurture talent.
For sure.
Especially when the employees are coming up to you, right? And telling you how thankful they are because that she in this instance, made a meaningful impact on their lives, right? And that's a good coach and a good business leader.
So let's get into amyloidosis, what that's been like, Mark. Probably the biggest obstacle I'm guessing you've had to overcome. You've done it with incredible grace, with every ounce of what you've already described.
Yeah.
Take us through that, where you're at, what you're doing, how you're doing.
Well, so amyloidosis, either one of you ever heard of it before?
I hadn't. No, it's not before this conversation.
Disorder that basically our bone marrow produces plasma proteins. So your body needs, to build muscle and all that kind of stuff. Well, sometimes the production of those plasma proteins gets out of whack and they clump together. Instead of going through your blood vessels like a Wyoming coal train, they clump and then they attack your vital organs and clog them up like an air filter that's clogged. It could be your heart, your lungs, your liver, your nervous system, your kidneys. Went after my kidneys and it destroyed my kidneys. And, I had to have 8 months of chemo and 3 days a week dialysis, just basically to stay alive. And to your point, Pat, that when you realize you got something inside that's trying to kill you, you get real serious about living, so we were hoping my kidneys would wake up, but they didn't. And this is such a rare disease. There's 6 billion people on the planet, I think, like 100,000 of us have this. So whatever the odds are of that, but it's very, very rare. So we were hoping my kidneys would wake up. They don't wake up. And so then I go, okay, I need a kidney transplant. And so I am in the process of trying to get on the transplant list so that I can get a kidney, or I face a lifetime of being on dialysis. I've switched from in-facility dialysis to something called peritoneal dialysis at home while I sleep, which is a lot easier on your body and all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is, if I don't get a kidney transplant, I face a life on dialysis, and certainly, if I quit dialysis, I'd die. And kidney disease is a major problem. We got 100,000 people in America waiting for kidney transplants. And so I was inspired by some buddies. I've got a Friday morning Bible study. I've been going to it for 20 years. It's like a locker room. You go in there and, what's going on? Oh, well, my dog died and my wife left me and I lost my job. Broncos lost. You ask for prayer. And they got to me and said, "Mac, what about you?" And I go, "Well, my kidneys didn't wake up, so I need so I need a transplant." And one of my buddies looked at me and said, "McIntosh, given your communication skills and your social network. Like about 30,000 people follow me on social media. Go find 5,000. So that was the birth of Drive for Five, where we've hooked up with Olympians and military people globally. We're trying to go after 5,000 live organ donors because you can share your spare, save a life, and leave a priceless legacy. Because you can live with one kidney, you can give somebody a lobe of your liver, you can give them some bone marrow. And it's really not that big a deal for you, and you can save somebody's life.
So to put a little more context on this, because I see this every day. I saw you were down and out for a bit, I mean, you didn't know what this was. We could all tell you lost a lot of weight. Then you got the diagnosis. This guy shows up. I mean, I don't know if it's every day, but pretty much every day. You're in there pounding away, and you've come back. I mean, you've come back remarkably. I see you in there doing kind of spin classes with some of these guys. You're a warrior, man. And I know we all want to think we're warriors, but you're living proof of it. And I mean, based on what you told us, it doesn't surprise me. Here you are, this fairly dire, significant situation. What do? You go out and start another nonprofit and go out and get this huge following. And you're still out writing stories on Deion Sanders and helping guys and leading groups, the homelessness. It's really powerful. You're a stud, man. You're my hero.
Thank you. I really kind of feel, and this gets back to my faith, I'm 65. I was planning on, still working with displaced men, stronger cord. And we didn't have time to get to the Roadrunner pathway. We could talk about that, about, educational equity in America. That's big business, right? We could talk about that another time, but I thought, all right, I'm going to help displaced men. I'm going to help low-income kids believe they can go to college and learn the business side of sports and the winning side of life. And then I was going to play more golf. And then Amy the asshole. I can say asshole on a podcast, can I? Yeah,
you can say whatever you want. This is raw and unfiltered, Mark. That's our thing.
Amyloidosis. It's very difficult to pronounce. So it's Amy. It's Amy. Amy's an asshole. She shows up, and then suddenly you go down this. Whoa, it's no cure for this, but you can live with it because, they figured that out. It used to be 5 years ago. I'm probably a goner, but they've made some advances. So it's kind of under check, but then it destroyed my kidneys. And then you start to fall into this. I kind of feel, to go back to journalism, I feel God has a plan for my life. And I kind of feel like I'm being called, I'm on assignment to go try to lessen the amount of displaced men in our communities, try to help these low-income kids believe that college is possible, and try to encourage more people, hey, share your spare, save a life, leave a priceless legacy. I'm on assignment. I'm too busy to die. I got things to get done. And that's how I feel about it. And being around guys like you help me. I go in the gym with my buddies, and I can't 1/10 what Lyndon can throw around there. But when you need 1 yard, we're going to Wildcat, and we're just going to snap it right to Lyndon, and I'll take it.
Don't inflate his ego more than it already is, please.
So listen, I want to on this front.
Philly tush push.
There you go. Right. Where can the audience go to, Mark, to kind of support this cause?
Great question.
Yeah, right now, the Drive for Five is the main thing that is really top. But then I need more men to become back coaches.
Real quick, Drive for Five is
Drive for Five. We don't have a website yet, but we have a LinkedIn page, Drive for Five.
LinkedIn, Drive for Five.
Just type in Drive for Five, and it'll pop up, and you'll see some of the content. But we are just creating content to try to raise awareness to folks. Hey, you can share your spare. And then a stronger cord, we do have a website for that, astrongercord.org, and that's about displaced men. And then back to LinkedIn for the Roadrunner pathway, the educational stuff. If you just typed in MSU Denver for Metropolitan State University Denver, they're our partners in this. MSU Denver.
That's the Irv Brown Endowment Fund.
Yeah, well, I'm the chairman of that. We provide the scholarships for these kids who think they can't go to college. I'm the chairman of that. So if you got somebody out there that wants to drop $50,000 in my pocket to help.
So if you, for the audience, if you Google,
I'm going to take a mile. You can Google
there you go. You're like Gail Sayers.
opportunity, right? Man.
You just
knocking.
Hey, you just needed an inch of daylight, right?
Run the daylight. Run the daylight.
But I was looking at this. If you go to the Google Irv Brown Endowment Fund, you'll see MSU Denver. You can find more about that. And then So True. Go to the LinkedIn.
You can go to LinkedIn for either. No, you can Google MSU Denver Roadrunner Pathway or Irv Brown Endowment Fund in the search bar on LinkedIn. And those are, and then same thing for Drive for Five and A Stronger Cord, because it's been around for 10 years. It's got a website, but the website's old and tired. The guy running it's been kind of fighting for his life for the last year or so. So it needs upgrading, but it's all about what we're looking for there. Need men like you guys to join us as comeback coaches. And we go out and we build relationships with these dudes and we earn their trust. And then they'll kind of follow us.
Love that.
The resources are out there. The resources are out there, but we need to humanize this problem. And that's what we try to do.
Brian, I have a special going away thing for you, Mark. I want to let my partner, Brian, share any thoughts he has in closing. This has been amazing.
I said it earlier when we started this conversation. You've certainly embraced this unfolding journey, and you've done it with class and dignity, and you've got a great story. I don't think it's near completion, but we really have enjoyed this time. Man. That's what I said. It's not near completion.
I feel like we just started the fourth quarter. We're running down to the other end of the field.
You got several more overtimes.
That's coming. Exactly. You've got plenty in your future.
I can tell you got a lot in the tank.
But we really do appreciate the time, and I know Pat, you give him the special.
Yeah, buddy, this has been great. Thanks for doing the honor of coming on here. We could talk for hours and hours. There's so many good sports nuggets. Maybe we'll get to that another day. But I've got to, the name of the show is BizMafia.
Okay.
Brian and I came up with it, identified over a Goodfellas movie.
Yeah.
Or the Goodfellas movie originally, both sports nuts, business guys, whatever. Yeah. Here, I wrote a little something for you.
Oh my God.
It's time for a Grazie-like tip of the hat to Mark McIntosh, the sports world's consigliere and a godfather of goodwill. He's the kind of wise guy who takes life's curveballs and whacks them out of the park. Mark reminds us that in the mafia of life, it's all about how you play the cards you're dealt. Mark's journey is a true testament that with grit and grace, you can always be the boss of your own story.
That's great, Pat.
Wow. Thank you, buddy.
So there you go, buddy.
One of the things about this that's been pretty incredible, as old athletic rivalries, these guys that, I competed against back in high school and summer ball and all that kind of stuff, as they got wind how they reached out, and very similar to what you just did there, Pat. And to know that you're respected by your peers, and it inspires me because, at certain points in my life, they showed grit and determination and everything, and so I fed off them, and if maybe they're feeding off of typical Mac, he's going to fight this to the finish. It's just meant the world to me to have these people say the kind of things you just said. And thank you. Because it takes me back to, I think what is my core. I'm just a dumb old jock from Missouri that was taught to never give up, to have your actions speak far louder than your words. I grew up in the show me state, and just to work well with others. And that's kind of what I just marinated in that in the community of Raytown, Missouri, and it's never left me. And it's sure coming in handy at this time.
Thank you, buddy. Great stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Appreciate you, Mark.
Oh, no problem.